Modern conflicts in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. 15 years of warfare. The combined death toll? 796,991 lives. Now consider Stalingrad. 6 months of battle. 1.9 million dead. A single German officer foresaw this catastrophe. He calculated the exact week Soviet forces would strike. He identified precisely which defensive positions would crumble. He predicted how many soldiers would perish in the snow. His reward? Immediate dismissal. 2 months later, his prophecy materialized with horrifying accuracy. 280,000 troops found themselves surrounded, cut off, condemned. In the aftermath, 994 children emerged from the wreckage. Fewer than 10 located their families. This is Franz Halder's story. A military strategist who sacrificed his career for honesty, who chose uncomfortable facts over convenient fantasies. Late September 1942. Inside a fortified compound in East Prussia, Germany's military leadership assembled for a critical briefing. Senior Wehrmacht commanders filled the chamber. Each man maintained rigid composure. Nobody dared reveal their thoughts. Adolf Hitler occupied the dominant position. Before him stood his chief of general staff, preparing to deliver an assessment that would terminate his military service. Franz Halder. 4 years as Germany's principal strategic planner, the architect behind lightning victories across Poland, the mind that coordinated France's rapid defeat, the organizer of operations that established German dominance throughout Europe. Now, as autumn deepened, he prepared to violate Nazi Germany's most fundamental rule, challenging the Führer's judgment. His topic? The assault on Stalingrad. General Paulus commanded the Sixth Army in a grinding urban nightmare. 8 weeks of combat through industrial ruins beside the Volga River. Advancement measured in single buildings, sometimes individual rooms. The casualty reports grew more devastating daily. Halder had analyzed every number, studied every supply calculation, examined every intelligence report. His conclusion? Disaster loomed. Halder presented his findings methodically. Since August, the Sixth Army absorbed 80,000 casualties. Soviet reinforcements crossed the Volga nightly, endless replacements flowing into the battle. German logistics stretched impossibly thin across hundreds of kilometers of exposed territory. Partisan attacks increased weekly, disrupting critical supply convoys. Winter approached rapidly. The army lacked adequate preparation. Then Halder spoke the career-destroying words. My Führer, our current forces cannot capture Stalingrad. The resource expenditure vastly exceeds any potential strategic advantage. I propose defensive consolidation, winter preparation, and renewed offensive action next spring with proper logistics and reinforcements. Complete silence descended. Every officer understood the magnitude of this moment. Halder had directly opposed Hitler's strategy, suggested defensive action, implied the Führer's military judgment contained flaws. Such statements ended careers, sometimes ended lives. Hitler's expression darkened. When he finally spoke, his voice carried dangerous quietness. You advocate withdrawal, you who supervised every setback in this campaign, you who perpetually counsel caution while I deliver triumph after triumph? Halder maintained his position. This moment defined everything. He could retract his assessment, apologize, soften his language, or maintain professional integrity. Accept the consequences. He chose integrity. My Führer, I've conducted detailed logistical analysis. The Sixth Army requires 700 tons of daily supplies. Current delivery capacity averages 300 tons under optimal conditions. Winter weather will reduce this further. Soviet forces show no signs of collapse. Intelligence indicates major offensive preparations targeting our flanks. Romanian and Italian units hold these positions with inadequate anti-tank capabilities. Continued concentration at Stalingrad risks complete encirclement of the entire Sixth Army. Halder's specificity amplified the offense. Vague concerns might be dismissed. Detailed projections that contradicted Hitler's vision? Unforgivable. He deployed facts and mathematics against willpower and ideology. Hitler rose from his chair. Restraint vanished. You presume to lecture me on possibility? I achieved what every expert declared impossible. I conquered France in 6 weeks when your general staff predicted years. I elevated Germany from humiliation to continental mastery. Halder attempted response. My Führer, I acknowledge your achievements completely. However, the mathematical reality, Mathematics. Hitler's voice exploded. Always mathematics. Always logistics. Always caution. Victory demands will, determination, refusing defeat. The Bolsheviks approach collapse. Stalingrad represents the key. Its capture destroys their entire Volga position. We control the river. We access Caucasus oil. We win this war. At what price? Halder's voice rose involuntarily. Even capturing Stalingrad requires weeks more urban combat. We'll possess an exhausted force holding an exposed position deep in Soviet territory. As winter arrives with supply lines incapable of sustenance, Hitler's fist struck the table. I'm surrounded by defeatists, men who perceive obstacles instead of opportunities, generals demanding retreat at initial resistance. You've obstructed this army's potential from the beginning. You opposed the French offensive. You opposed Soviet invasion. You opposed every bold decision that produced German victory. Now you oppose Stalingrad. The accusation held partial validity. Halder had questioned numerous Hitler decisions, but he'd also executed them brilliantly. Hitler remembered only the objections, never the successes. In his worldview, questioning him proved wrongness, because he was never wrong. Other officers shifted uncomfortably. Several agreed with Halder's assessment. Eastern Front field commanders transmitted identical reports about supply problems and troop exhaustion. None spoke up. They'd learned that supporting criticism of Hitler's strategy meant career destruction. Halder made one final attempt. My Führer, I've served Germany faithfully. You've served timidity, served obsolete general staff thinking. Not served Germany's required vision? I need generals believing in victory, not accountants calculating costs. Hitler turned toward Field Marshal Keitel, his most obedient subordinate. Halder is relieved as Chief of General Staff effective immediately. General Zeitzler replaces him. Perhaps younger leadership with Eastern Front experience provides the aggressive mentality this position demands. Halder removed his collar insignia, placed them on the table. He'd anticipated this outcome the moment he chose honesty. He rendered a formal salute, departed the chamber, his military career concluded. Yet walking out, Halder knew his calculations were accurate. Every projection, every concern, the next 4 months would vindicate him catastrophically. 8 weeks later, the predicted counteroffensive launched. November 19, 1942. Soviet armor smashed into Romanian defensive positions north and south of Stalingrad. Exactly as Halder warned, Romanian forces, equipped with insufficient anti-tank weapons and thin defensive depth, disintegrated within hours. 4 days later, the German Sixth Army was completely surrounded. Over 280,000 soldiers, trapped inside the city, Hitler insisted must be held, regardless of cost. The supply crisis Halder calculated with precision now manifested exactly as projected. Luftwaffe attempted aerial resupply. They never approached the required 700 daily tons. Most days delivered 100 tons or less. Soldiers starved. Equipment failed without fuel or replacement parts. Medical supplies exhausted. Men froze in inadequate shelters. Sixth Army commanders transmitted desperate requests for breakout authorization while opportunity existed. Hitler refused. He remembered Halder's withdrawal recommendation. Remained determined to prove willpower could override logistics. The army would hold Stalingrad. Relief forces would break through. Determination and fighting spirit would restore the situation. But determination cannot manifest food from nothing. Willpower cannot generate ammunition. Fighting spirit cannot warm, freezing soldiers or heal wounded without medical supplies. Halder's mathematics proved inexorable. December brought combat ineffectiveness. January brought starvation deaths. February 2, 1943 brought surrender. From 280,000 trapped soldiers, approximately 91,000 survived to surrender. Most perished in captivity. Roughly 6,000 ever returned to Germany. Halder observed this from enforced retirement. He maintained detailed private journals that later became crucial historical documents. He recorded frustration at being correct while treated as wrong. Documented how his predictions materialized precisely and reflected on the fundamental dysfunction that destroyed him and would ultimately destroy Germany. Hitler constructed a system where truth became whatever he declared, facts contradicting his vision, dismissed as defeatism, officers presenting accurate assessments, accused of lacking fighting spirit. The entire command structure corrupted by requiring leaders hear what they wanted, rather than what they needed. Halder attempted being the exception, tried maintaining professional military standards of honest assessment and realistic planning. But in Hitler's Germany, professional competence ranked beneath ideological loyalty. Better wrong and loyal than right and critical. Sycophants survived. Truth-tellers were eliminated. Kurt Seitzler, Halder's replacement, initially showed more aggression and optimism. Hitler appreciated this. Within months, however, Seitzler presented identical Stalingrad concerns Halder had voiced. Difference? By then the army was already encircled. Seitzler's belated honesty prevented nothing, only documented disaster. Hitler's response to Seitzler mirrored his response to Halder. Dismissing concerns, accusing defeatism, insisting willpower would prevail. Seitzler lasted longer than Halder. Eventually, he too was dismissed after repeatedly requesting retreats that might preserve German forces. He suffered nervous collapse in 1944. Removed from command. The pattern repeated throughout the war. Competent generals telling truth were fired. Yes men were promoted. German military operations grew increasingly detached from strategic reality. Field Marshal von Manstein, arguably Germany's most capable general, managed this balance better than most. He presented realistic assessments framed to avoid directly contradicting Hitler, requested flexible defense rather than retreat, emphasized strategic repositioning rather than withdrawal. This semantic game sometimes succeeded, but it meant even Germany's finest military minds spent energy managing Hitler's ego rather than fighting. Effectively, Halder's dismissal tragedy extended beyond losing one capable staff officer. The incident transmitted a clear message throughout the Wehrmacht, telling the Führer truth proved more dangerous than losing battles. This created an atmosphere where officers at every level learned to distort or suppress information that might anger Hitler. Intelligence reports softened, casualty figures minimized, enemy strength underestimated, supply problems downplayed. This systematic information distortion flowed upward through command structure. Hitler's decisions relied on increasingly fictional reality assessments. He made strategic choices based on what subordinates thought he wanted hearing, rather than actual conditions. This information gap widened throughout the war, contributing to catastrophic decisions in 1943, 44, and 45. 1944. Allied forces landed at Normandy. Hitler refused releasing panzer reserves, convinced the landing represented a feint with the real invasion targeting Calais. His generals knew better, but learned not contradicting him too forcefully. When Hitler finally accepted Normandy as the main invasion, effective counterattack became impossible. 1945. Soviet forces approached Berlin. Hitler still moved phantom divisions on maps, issued orders to non-existent armies, planned counteroffensives with destroyed resources. His staff knew the situation was hopeless, but continued executing meaningless orders because they'd learned truth-telling, brought punishment while obedient failure was merely unfortunate. Halder survived after the July 1944 assassination plot. He was arrested despite no direct involvement, imprisoned at Flossenburg and Dachau, April 1945. American forces liberated him. Post-war, he served as consultant for historical research on German military operations, provided detailed testimony about the dysfunctional Hitler-General Staff relationship, explained how professional military planning was subordinated to ideological fantasy, documented precisely how Hitler's reality refusal produced strategic catastrophes. Writings revealed mixed feelings about his dismissal. Being proven right offered cold comfort when hundreds of thousands died unnecessarily, yet he'd maintained professional integrity when delusion was easier and safer, told truth when truth-telling was dangerous, paid its price. Halder's firing extends beyond military history, a case study in what occurs when institutions prioritize loyalty over competence, when criticism becomes betrayal, when leaders surround themselves with yes men rather than experts willing to deliver bad news. The pattern appears recognizable across history and organizational types. Leaders who punish truth-tellers create systems where truth becomes increasingly scarce. Subordinates learn telling, Leaders what they want hearing, rather than what they need. Knowing, decisions emerge from comfortable fictions rather than uncomfortable facts. Eventually, reality asserts itself catastrophically in ways that could have been avoided if someone had listened. To people like Halder. September 24, 1942, Hitler dismissed his most capable general for delivering honest Stalingrad. Assessment also the day Hitler guaranteed Stalingrad would become exactly the catastrophe Halder predicted by eliminating his one advisor, willing to speak honestly. Hitler ensured nobody else would attempt it. Stalingrad truth became unspeakable. Unspeakable truth led to unspeakable tragedy. Franz Halder lived until 1972, long enough to witness Germany's rebuilding, the Wehrmacht's partial rehabilitation, historians recognizing his Stalingrad accuracy, but also long enough to understand being right mattered, less than being believed, that telling truth cost him everything, while lies cost Germany infinitely more. Halder's firing wasn't merely a personnel decision, a choice between reality and fantasy, professional competence and ideological purity, honest assessment and comfortable delusion. Hitler chose wrongly. 280,000 soldiers at Stalingrad paid that choice's price. End.